did 4 years in the program. He was in the Navy. He earned a degree in zoology from University of Louisiana and MD from Tulane. And anyway, so thank you for being here, John.
I was going to say something, but we all know the age. So this is the book. It is coming out September 18th from the University of Louisiana Press, Kings, Conquerors, Psychopaths, from Alexander to Hitler to the corporation. And I really want to thank Zart. And who is in charge? Who is this morning? Okay, so Zart. So I contacted her and they were nice to fit me on. And first of all, this is an honor, and I'm a bit humbled. I mean, I look out here, I see so many of you who are in the program with me who were really smart. Did any of you ever get the impression walking around the program that maybe George Middleton made a mistake? You know, I was hoping that somebody else was going to be here, because I look over, I was going to say, "What about you, Joe Barnes, you bastard?" So, is he here? Well, yeah. For those of you, everybody here had no Joe Barnes, but one time Dr. Middleton said, "Yeah, there's somebody who maxed out the IQ test at 198," and a group of us kind of looked at each other and said, "Joe Barnes." So when Zart approached me about it, I kind of thought, I don't know, how does this tie into the program? And I suddenly realized it ties very strongly into the program. The last reunion I made, someone asked Dr. Middleton why he founded this place. And he talked about, it was kind of a touching story, that when he was little, he was a creative, inquisitive, kind of nerdy kind of kid, and he got bullied. And he wanted to create a place where people who were creative and inquisitive could gather in some safety without the bullies. So he's sort of like Charles Francis Xavier, and we're the mutant freaks, the X-Men, right? So, woohoo! Let's hear it from you. And we use our powers only for good, right? We every morning we sing the impossible dream and go out and fight. And that's an interesting thing, because it's only in the past few weeks I've realized, going back, writing the front material for the book, and we're still crunching, and I'm sorry, I'm do my damnedest to get through all this, if I don't, I'll just truncate. But this is also tied into the Cajun Creole culture of South Louisiana, and that is the theme. How many of you here are Cajun? How many of you are aware that your earliest ancestors arrived in the New World 16 years before the Mayflower sailed? You knew, okay. How many of you were aware that that in colonial studies everyone talks about how quickly Pennsylvania grew? It was the fastest growing colony, but in fact the Acadian colony grew faster than Pennsylvania, with very few immigrants, because Pennsylvania's growth was largely immigrants. And how many of you knew that 150 years or more before the United States was founded, that the Acadians started their experiment in democracy? Okay, Amanda's back there. She's nodding and all this. Okay, all right, you know it all. I got it. We got it. Okay, so and that is her. That is, huh? It was her. Yeah. Oh yeah, she did the same thing. Okay, so and it was very much the same thing. The Acadians started their democratic experiment not because of the reasons that the founders of this country did, but simply because of the incompetence of 17th and 18th century colonial French administration, who kind of left them on their own. So they invented their own solutions. And the point that ties those two together is that when you remove the bullies, innovation just emerges. You do not have to cultivate genius. It emerges, and that will be the conclusion, if I get that far, to this book. Okay, and it's true of every child, and it's true of all civilizations. Just remove the bullies. Okay, so the book is Kings, Conquerors, Psychopaths, and by lucky coincidence, those are the first 3 chapters. Just worked out that way. But the first one, and by the way, I get to work in some of our GPGC stage productions. I was hoping Nancy Key would be here. But the first chapter is about kings, and one of our misconceptions is that kings were Camelot. Okay, they were King Arthur. They were nice guys, and they weren't. We look at the cartoons of Hagar the Horrible showing up. The tax man shows up with the executioner in tow with his axe, and we kind of chuckle. No, that's the king's game. You pay him money, It's a protection racket. You don't pay, you die, or you're ruined. And just like the mobster will grab high profit, low overhead industries, prostitution, gambling, narcotics, so the king grabbed ports and roads and mines, and he exploited those. And these guys were absolutely brutal, and they were vicious, and we'll come back to that. Second chapter is Conquerors, and one of the themes in here is that Hitler looked back to Alexander, Julius Caesar, and Napoleon as his heroes, and we think, though, that's horrific, because he was a fiend and they were great men. But in reality, they were all fiends. They were vicious, vicious fiends. Napoleon, he disseminated revolutionary ideals of the Enlightenment, introduced across Europe, introducing some popular sovereignty and representative government, brought in freedom of religion, a uniform legal code. We're in Louisiana. Economic and educational reforms. He introduced meritocratic appointments and promotions within his army and his administration. There were scientific advances and the whole thing, but Napoleon was also a remorseless butcher. Let me set my alarm, my timer, so that I don't go over.
I'm gonna be going like this.
Well, I need to. I know, but I need to know how I'm winding down, because. No.
Wax poetic.
I can. I'm gonna. Do I have like 20? How much time do I have left right now?
Let's say, like 12 minutes. How about?
How about 20 minutes?
20 minutes. Robert's giving you.
This is a 30-minute talk. Okay. We just started. Okay. So. No. And oh, great. So it fell apart. This is great. So Napoleon was also a fiend. So he was also a fiend, and I start off with Napoleon specifically so I can start off with this passage. Consider the 1799 siege of Jaffa, which is near present-day Tel Aviv. Napoleon sent in negotiators, and their heads quickly appeared on the ramparts. When he broke through, he ordered complete annihilation, and a French doctor describes the carnage. The soldiers cut the throats of men and women, the old and young, Christians and Turks, father and son, one on top of the other on the same pile of bodies, a daughter being raped on the cadaver of her mother, the smoke from the burnt clothes of the dead, the smell of blood, the groans of the wounded, the shouts of the victors who were quarreling about the loot taken from a dying victim. And then after the sack of the town, the women whom the troops found attractive were spared and became sex slaves. Some of these, from other documents, we're pretty sure were prepubertal girls. They were bartered, they were bet in card games, they were swapped about, and unfortunately they started fighting over the girls, so Napoleon had them rounded up, took them back to town, and executed them all. After the sack, Napoleon ordered any surviving citizens to be executed, and over the next few days, 2,000 to 3,000 people were marched to the beach. After the first day, they realized they were losing too many bullets. So the soldiers were ordered to mount bayonet and start killing them manually. And the same doctor describes the aftermath. Among the victims, we found many children who, in the act of death, had clung to their fathers. Unlike the sack of the city, these executions were very orderly, and one witness reports they did not cry, they did not shout, they were resigned. What else do we expect? What did we think conquest was? We have paintings of the conqueror coming in town and everybody bowing down. Most of you are probably aware of William the Conqueror. Soon after he conquers England, he's got to go through the harrying of the North. You've got to love the English. They understate everything. It was horrific butchery and just destruction of everything, and the burning of the fields and slaying of people, and it was horrific. These are the 5 starting theses from my book. 1, conquest is murder and theft. 2, conquerors were vicious criminals. Vicious criminals become kings. Kings design civilization. And here's where we come to the modern age. You and I are products of civilization. And this affects us in profound ways. So then I back up and I go to Alexander, and of course he brought Athenian culture, mainly to the Orient, right? And it was important that he did, because when Rome collapses and we enter the medieval period, a lot of the important Athenian documents were preserved in the Islamic world. Okay, but early on in his monarchy, there was an uprising in Thebes, and his counselors suggested, use moderation, negotiate, and he was young and hot-headed. So it was that many terrible things befell the city. Greeks were mercilessly slain by Greeks. Relatives were butchered by their own relatives. And even a common dialect induced no pity. In the end, when night finally intervened, the houses had been plundered, and children and women and aged persons who had fled into the temples were torn from sanctuary and subjected to outrage without limit. Over 6,000 Thebans perished, more than 30,000 were captured, and the amount of property plundered was unbelievable. It turns out that Alexander was also a bit of a sadist, and he came out of a really sick family. At one point, when Alexander's a teenager, his father grows tired of Alexander's mother, or whatever, Olympias, and takes a new wife, Eurydice. At the wedding feast, Philip says something very insulting to Alexander, and Alexander curses him or something. I think throws a goblet at him. Philip pulls his sword, charges across the room, ready to kill his son, and he slips and falls to the floor. And just to give you an idea how dysfunctional these people are, Alexander turned to his friends and said he wishes to cross the continents and he can't cross the floor. That's how upset Alexander was about it. His wife, his mother, Olympias, she was a nasty piece of work. 2 years after Philip's marriage to Eurydice, he was assassinated by one of his own bodyguard, and a number of historians have suspected that Alexander and Olympias planned it. And during the Persian campaign, he sent word to his mother, "Take care of my enemies." She used the instruction to exact revenge on Eurydice. In varying accounts, she either stabbed Alexander's half-sister Europa as she lay at her mother's breast, then had Eurydice hanged, or she had Eurydice and her infant son Caranus roasted on a bronze vessel. In response to all this viciousness, Alexander simply said, she charges a high price for 9 months' rent. He tortured people to death. He was horrifically vicious and horrifically vindictive. The next conqueror we look at is, of course, Julius Caesar. Brings much of Roman culture to France, and the modern world would not exist without him. The Romans, who were horrifically vicious culture. Remember, these are people who went and sat at the Colosseum to watch people kill each other on the arena. And these were not just men, these were women, there were people executed. What most people don't know is there were over 220 known arenas across the Roman Empire. Even a modest calculation is that something like 4 million people were killed for entertainment in the Roman Empire. There are other examples. But Julius Caesar was pretty nasty too. Considered Caesar's defeat of the Helvetii, who are somehow the Swedes. They are the Swedes, but I don't figure it out. The Helvetii and allied tribes in 56 BCE. First, Caesar ambushed some of them as they crossed the Salon River. After most of the group had crossed, he and his troops attacked the stranded remnant and slaughtered everyone, children, women, and the small force of warriors protecting them. A few weeks later, in a brief 9-hour battle, he and his armor slew the rest. By Caesar's own account, the slain comprised 258,000, 250,000 people. That's kind of maybe an exaggeration. But even Hitler admits only 92,000 of them were warriors. The rest were children and women and men. And Caesar did not sit back on a hill directing this. He enjoyed getting on horse, chasing people down and slaughtering them. He was part of the carnage. I go on. That chapter, Conquerors, is like a fourth of the book. It was 2 years of intense research. It's about 30,000 words. But I look at the Old Testament, and particularly David. I look at the Athenians. I look at the Romans. I look at the Christians, particularly Constantine. Constantine was horrific. Right before the Council of Nicaea, he orders his own son executed. We don't know why. His name is Crispus. And he was an able general. We believe he was executed with his wife Constantine's daughter-in-law, and Constantine's grandson, who was a toddler. We think this because he performed damnatio memoriae against him. The family was removed from, their image was removed anywhere it appeared. So it's believed that all three of them were executed. We look at the Victorian English, we look at the Americans, including the Pilgrims, who were horrific. I look at Ashoka, then an equal opportunity offender. Ashoka, Atahualpa, Genghis Khan, Shaka Zulu, he was nasty. And then I look at the moderns, but just basically just touching on them. Stalin, Mao, Kim Jong-il, Pol Pot, Idi Amin, Leopold of Belgium, Armenian genocide, Russian Civil War, Japanese and World War II, 2 Chinese civil wars, Indochina, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Bangladesh, Sudan, the Mexican Revolution, and of course that's not even talking about Hitler and World War II. Those are only some of the persecutions that claimed 1 million lives or more. The lower grade persecutions don't even get a lot of attention, and some of them are completely unknown. So that's the Conqueror. Okay, and I get to psychopaths, and there are 2 critical ideas here. One is the dark triad, and the dark triad is psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism. And then the dark tetrad is adds in sadism. Okay, and in the book I added a 5th element. It slowly occurred to me that there is I think it's a psychiatric dysfunction that we don't discuss, which is fanaticism and zealotry. But they are disorders in thinking. They are very important, particularly in the history of the world, because what happens with Hitler and Pol Pot is you take the dark tetrad and you add on ideology, and suddenly everything is intensified. Suddenly we're not killing people for narcissism and for domination, we're killing people out of some ideology. That will become very important. I look at psychopathy. Basically the psychopath does not have emotional ties to other people. I think I've identified some moral psychopaths, which may sound strange, but they operate at a philosophical level. Their commitment to other people is intellectual. One of them, by the way, is Oskar Schindler. Schindler was a really interesting person and is not the person who's portrayed in the movie. Then there's narcissism. This one is critical in the modern world. This is probably what really drives most conquerors, and you'll see it in the halls of government, you'll see it in industry, you'll see it in the military, and you have to meet 5 of 9 criteria. I need to run through those because they will become obvious why they're important in the modern world. Grandiosity, with expectations of superior treatment from others. Fixated on fantasies of power, success, intelligence, attractiveness. Self-perception of being unique, superior, and associated with high-powered people, high-status people and institutions. Needing constant admiration from others. Sense of entitlement to special treatment and to obedience from others. Exploitative of others to achieve personal gain. Unwilling to empathize with others' feelings, wishes, or needs, intensely envious of others, and the belief that they are equally envious of him, and a pompous and arrogant demeanor. And you think about the ancient kings. We were required to bow. We were required to kowtow. We were required to use effusive compliments. We had to give them lofty titles. They would have themselves declared not just king, but gods. They were obsessed with money, power, fame, sex, and all the attention they could get. They had to be the center of everything. And one of the manifestations of this was the cult of personality, which we still see in some places, but one of the more interesting recent examples was Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un's father. And here was a guy who was an expert, an international expert on the internet in a country which hardly had any internet. He was an international expert on film in a country which hardly had electricity. His first time bowling, he bowled a perfect game. His first time golfing, he hit, I forget how many holes in one. And the corker was, the man never defecated. Okay? Now, you laugh at this, but think about this. The North Koreans believe this. They have been indoctrinated, and this is one of the central questions I ask. Why are we nuts? Why do we blindly follow people? And we can all find examples of this in the political systems today. But you know where we don't see it? In ourselves. It's very easy for the other party, the other religion, or the other football team to see our faults, but we don't see ours. Why is it that we will follow these crazy guys? Why do we think these were the worst and the sickest elements of history? You have people like Ted Bundy, who furtively grabs women and tortures them to death. Napoleon walks through the streets in broad daylight, killing millions. He was vastly worse than what we think of the worst we have in the world. So why do we call these men great? Because they were mostly men. There were a few significant women. Why do we call them great? Why do we think otherwise? Why do we praise the worst criminals in history? Okay, so we get to the breeding program. And it turns out that Genghis Khan, who was the second greatest conqueror in history, and he conquered, it was a phenomenal portion of the world and killed how many other people? He had a unique gene. It's called a star cluster. I think that's the name. And it can be easily traced. And it turns out that 0.5% of all the people living today are direct descendants of Genghis Khan. And you know what's scary about it? It's still less than the number of people he killed. Okay? But the point is, he was one conqueror. Granted, he was one of the most successful, but he was only one. There have been tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands who came through butchering and raping. And we all have them as our ancestors. And if one of them was a king, we brag about it. We brag about having ancestors who were some of the most vicious people who ever lived. But the other part of the equation is we are descendants of their victims. Okay? So, what happens when the crazy bastard at the top says he's a god? You agree with him, right? No. You believe him. Because if you simply say that you believe it, you're going to slip. You'll have a private conversation. You'll hesitate. You'll think for yourself. The easiest path to survival was to believe what the crazy bastard at the top said. We have come out of 10,000 years of this. And when you look at people who blindly follow ideology, this is a strong cultural and genetic selective pressure. Okay? And then I don't have time to get into that, but one of the ideas is that we have pockets of deficits. And so you can have, like like Leni Riefenstahl, the famous Nazi filmographer, who was brilliant in art and never criticized the Nazis. You have engineers and great thinkers who were Nazis, who were great within their area, but they would not question over here. And we all do this. We have pockets of blindness. We have scotomata, we call them in medicine. I'm not going to go there for a minute, but just areas of blindness. And we actually had a name for the crime of offending the king. Lèse majesté. How do you say that in English? You have a lawyer here? Lèse majesté? How do we say it? No attorneys? Anyway, lèse majesté. I would think so. Nobody's, what is this?
I think we use that term.
But you say majesté, or do you say majesty, or majest? Okay. Yeah, but any insult to the king was a crime, punishable. Let's see, how much time I got? Not much. So I look at the noble classes and the fact that there were people in the hierarchy who was important. The implication is the rest of us were nothing. Okay, we look at privilege, private law. That's what the word means. One law for you, a different law for me. And one of the patterns I use is I just take, because it was convenient, the 7 heavenly virtues and the 7 deadly sins, which of course takes us back to Camelot, right? The 7 deadly virtues. But and the king was pure evil. Okay, I'd missed this in the tetrad. The tetrad is also the malignant narcissist, which is a non-standard psychiatric term. It goes back to Erich Fromm. He called it the quintessence of evil. It was pure evil. But it's also the conqueror. It's the people who murder and rape and torture. From there we go to the authoritarian personality. Theodor Adorno and the Frankfurt School that fled Nazi Germany. They came up with the fascist scale, or the F scale. You can see these behaviors in the modern world today. People who blindly follow a strong man. Goody. There's a genetic, there's a cultural. I kind of avoid saying it's absolutely one. There's a chapter in the book about genetics, eugenics, genocide, because we tend to conflate them. And my argument is human genetic behavior is ruts, not rails. Okay, it directs us but does not control us. And one of the things I come out, and I think this is true in some way for many of us, is that also genetics behavior is attitude, not aptitude. You and I do not have more arms, legs, or neurons than other kids, but what we had was, I think, an innate interest perhaps in music or mathematics or doing things with our hands or reading. Our parents reinforced that. Okay, but that's what I suspect a lot of genius. My little boy will not get up in front of anybody. My little girl is an Abraham with the emphasis on ham. Okay, she loves to be in front of people. Okay, so I only have about a minute left. So I've got to get to where we are, and then the king's heir. So the king becomes the modern CEO, and we don't see it because we are still blinded by the hierarchy. We still praise the king. But when you have to go into it, but you don't have to dig deep. Corporations willingly trade our lives for profits, and they do it all the time. It is exactly the same game the king pursued, but we don't see it any more than we saw it under the king. Well, this brings us to the modern world. Okay, so if you took the Pharaoh and brought him to 1776 London or Paris, he would be very impressed. But there wouldn't be many things he couldn't understand once you opened it up and let him see inside. The clock would have been confusing. He would have had to understand a spring, maybe. But he could slowly, okay, I can see how this works. I could only think of 3 things that the Pharaoh would think were magic: gunpowder, the telescope, and the magnetic compass. There may be others. If you've got some ideas, I'm trying to kind of collecting this. But if you took one of the U.S. founders and brought them to the modern world, and they were sufficiently religious, they would see the diabolical everywhere they looked. Consider these things that they would be completely baffled to explain. Airplanes, automobiles, helicopters, movies and television, maglev trains, antibiotics, cardiovascular surgery, neurosurgery, electric lights, central air and heat, hot and cold running water, nuclear power, holograms, motion detectors, the electric stove, the microwave, submarines, aircraft carrier, ceramic knives, computers, four-color desktop printers, plastics, 3D printing, international telecommunications, space travel, robotics, a multitude of domestic appliances, industrial machines, and just plain old canned food. Food that doesn't go bad. It never goes bad. They're only a sample, and if you're interested in this, it's an interesting dinner conversation. What would have blown the founders away? The point is before 1776, progress was slow, and all of a sudden the world starts accelerating. What changed? We got rid of the bullies, and genius spontaneously emerges. I mentioned 1776. I'm going to jump ahead. I'm already over. World War II and the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan, I argue, was the high point of Western civilization. Never before had a conquering army sought to elevate its foes to equal partners and full autonomy. It had not happened. We were not the bully. We got rid of the bully. The other was the GI Bill, and all of a sudden, regular people could go to college, get an education, and this created the modern world. I'm going to wrap up real quick. Right now, we are talking about foreign powers investing in interfering in our elections and our democratic process. But there are internal powers that are tied to this that are largely unknown. I happened to pick up Nancy McLean's book, Democracy in Chains. And she documents this. And by the way, Bobby Jindal was tied into that. And if you're looking at the problems today in Louisiana, it goes back to a group of klepto-plutocrats who are literally trying to take us back to the medieval. One of their ideas is that why should the rich pay for the education of the poor? Which on face value sounds perfectly legitimate, right? But well, it does. No, why should I? Well, let's think about it. Why should I have to pay for somebody else's education? I have a friend of mine in Lafayette, Don Pippin, if any of you are from Lafayette, and he has this comment. He says it's original hymn. He said, if it weren't for employees and customers, business would be great. Okay, yeah. So the point is so you've got these klepto-plutocrats who want to get rid of public education, and this is the only modern person I'm going to mention. That is what Nancy DeVos is there to do, to dismantle public education. And my response to these klepto-plutocrats would be, where are you going to get employees? Where are your support industries going to get employees? And who the hell is going to buy your products? It can't work. And so one of my arguments is that within the capitalist system, There is the need, at least for socialist pockets. If not, I'm not for complete socialism, I'm not for complete capitalism. We have to be American pragmatists and find a balance. And this brings me back, and I'll close there. The problem with these klepto-plutocrats is that they are economic fanatics. They are capitalist fanatics. They are so tied to their ideology they cannot see how they are hurting themselves. And I always think of, first of all, Albert Einstein and Sigmund Freud fleeing Nazi Germany, two of the most influential thinkers of the past 150 years, because they were part of the inferior class. But I also think of Albert Einstein, Leo Szilard, and Oppenheimer bringing the war to a close, all of whom were Jewish. This underclass, this undesirable underclass that Hitler did not want because of his ideology. Now, we're all happy he didn't win, but where would he have been if he hadn't destroyed this talent pool that he had? And ideology helped bring his downfall. And ideology, I'm worried, may bring down our own country. Get rid of the bullies. Thank you.